Hi, I'm Jilly G. Welcome to my kitchen. Today I'm going to show you how to make my beef stew. And of course it will be gluten-free. And you might think that a beef stew is naturally gluten-free to begin with, and for the most part it is. I always double check my beef stock. If I don't make it myself and I buy it, I always double check the label. And then we will be adding in a little bit of flour, but we'll get to that. So I really like to have a lot of vegetables in my beef stew. But like so many of my recipes, use your favorite vegetables. I've got carrots and celery, potatoes, mushrooms, I've got some cabbage, onion and garlic, and I've got a couple of parsnips. And then I've got some frozen peas and corn. And then my beef stew today will also have bacon in it. And if you've never put bacon in your beef stew before, you should. It is absolutely delicious. So I've got, about 1 pound of bacon that I've cut up into pretty small pieces. And then I've got my large Dutch oven here, and I'm going to get my bacon frying. And then I've got a plate over here lined with a paper towel to drain this on. And I've got that on about medium-high heat. And then I've got about 1 pound of beef stew meat that is also cut into bite-sized pieces. While my bacon is frying, I'm going to get my vegetables cut up and put in this bowl. Everything except for my potatoes. Those I will add in very last. And if you've never seen a parsnip before, I've already peeled them. They kind of have a tannish yellow skin, very similar to a carrot. They look very similar to a carrot, but then once you peel off the skin, they are kind of this white color. And you might think, as I thought, that they are in the carrot family, but they're not. They're actually in the parsley family. And when you start to cut them, you notice that they are very similar to a carrot, but just a little bit different of a texture. And they add really good flavor to a beef stew. And I always like to cut everything in bite-sized pieces. Whenever I'm making a soup or a stew, I like to be able to fit everything on a spoon, especially with the beef. You don't want to manage a really big piece of beef that you don't have a knife to cut it. So while my bacon is getting louder and frying, I'm just going to cut up my vegetables and put them in my large bowl here. My bacon is almost finished frying, and I've got almost all of my vegetables cut up. And if you've never had cabbage in a beef stew before, you should try it. It really is so good. And I'd say that was about half a head of cabbage. And then I've got about 5 garlic cloves here. I'm going to get these chopped, and I'm not going to add them into my vegetables just yet. I've mentioned before, I always save my bacon grease, and I just poured it into a little jar, kind of made a mess. So be careful because the pan is hot and the grease is hot. And I've left a little bit of bacon grease in my Dutch oven to fry my stew meat. I'm going to add in some salt and pepper. Once my stew meat has some good color on it, I don't want this to be cooked all the way through, but it has some nice browning on it. I'm going to remove it to a bowl, add in a little bit more bacon grease, and then all of my vegetables except for my potatoes, my garlic, my peas, and my corn. I want to get these sauteed in this beef juice and bacon grease. I'm going to add in salt and pepper, and this is to taste, however much salt and pepper you like on your vegetables. Once my vegetables look like this, I'm going to stir in my garlic. And while those continue to saute, I'm going to get my potatoes cut up. Now for my potatoes, I'm going to add in the rest of my salt and pepper, and this was about 1 teaspoon of each total. Now for my peas and corn, and my stew meat. I'm going to add in my dry mustard and my dried thyme. Give all of this a really good stir. Use a hot pad if you have a Dutch oven like this. The handles get really hot. And now for my 4 cups of beef stock. Because I have so many vegetables in here, I may or may not add some extra water along with my beef stock. I think I'll start out with 1 cup of water. Give this a really good stir. I'm going to turn this up a little bit higher. I turned it down so my vegetables wouldn't burn. Add in my 2 bay leaves. But I want this to come up to a boil, and then I'll turn it down to a simmer. And once it does come up to a boil, I'll put the lid on. And I don't like my bacon to cook in there the whole time everything else is cooking, so I will add that in later. I'm going to clean everything up and we'll get on to our biscuits. So my soup is simmering, and it's on a pretty low heat, and I've got my oven preheating to 450. And we are going to make Swiss cheese and bacon biscuits to go with our beef stew. Gluten-free, of course. There is my Swiss cheese, and I was aiming for about a half a cup, and that is probably 1 cup. That's okay. I like extra cheese. And the biscuit recipe that I'm following today is my biscuit recipe. It's here in my cookbook. It's also here on my channel. And then all I'm doing is adding in some cheese and some bacon. So I've got 2 cups of my gluten-free flour. I've got 3 teaspoons of baking powder, 1 teaspoon of baking soda, and 1 teaspoon of salt. And then I do have an extra little bit of flour for patting out to put on our parchment paper, just so it doesn't stick. And then just mix this together. You don't really have to. And then I've got 5 tablespoons of butter that I've cut up, and it's pretty chilled. It's been in the fridge. And then before I mix this together, I've got 1 egg and 3/4 of a cup of kefir. And this is plain whole fat kefir. Traditionally, it would be buttermilk, but I find that the kefir does a really good job. And I like to mix the kefir and my egg together, then we don't overwork our biscuit dough. So now that that's mixed together, I'm just going to get in here with my hands, toss together my butter and my dry ingredients. I like to toss it together, kind of get the butter chunks coated in the flour, and then it's not just one big lump of butter. And then just start mashing it together between your thumbs and your fingers. We want to make pretty fine crumbs. And you don't want your butter to be too soft, or else it will just mash into your dry ingredients and make a paste instead of a dry, crumbly mixture. Once all of your butter is rubbed into your dry ingredients and it looks like this, there's still small chunks of butter in here, but not really big chunks. It mostly looks like pretty fine breadcrumbs. This is what we're looking for. So now that that's ready, I'm going to add in my cheese, and you can use your favorite cheese. I really like Swiss cheese. And then probably, a good handful or so of my bacon. And then I'm going to mix this together just to kind of get everything already mixed so we don't overwork our dough. And in goes our kefir and our egg. And then just start mixing this together. And once it looks like this, where it's mostly combined, there still is a little bit of dry ingredients. We're going to bring over our parchment paper, lightly flour, and then dump out our biscuit dough. Make sure to get all of it. And I don't want to knead this, but I do want to squish it together so it's all together. But you don't really need to get in there and manhandle it and knead it together. Add extra flour if you need to. And I'm not even going to use a rolling pin. I'm just going to pat it out with my hands. I want to try to keep it in a rectangle though. Dust with flour if your hands are sticking. And once you've got it into a pretty decent sized rectangle, I'm going to cut it into squares. No biscuit cutter or cookie cutter needed. And this recipe makes about 12 biscuits, so I figure I'll get 12 squares. It's a little challenging with the chunks of bacon in there, but do your best. And then I've got a little spatula just to help me lift my biscuits onto my cookie sheet. And I've got an ungreased cookie sheet. Try to make them all the same size, but it doesn't always work out that way. And if it starts to kind of crumble apart because the cheese and the bacon in there, just squish it together. Very carefully. Okay, these will go in the oven for 7 to 10 minutes. I'll probably start checking at 5 just because I haven't made biscuits yet in my new oven. While my biscuits are in the oven, I'm going to check on my stew. And this is looking really good. I don't think I need to add in any more water. I am going to taste it and see how my seasoning is. And I'm going to check one of the potatoes here and see how done they are. My biscuits are almost done. Maybe 2 more minutes. I'm going to add some more pepper. And some more salt. Now don't forget, we're going to be adding in the rest of our bacon, and that will add some seasoning as well. While I'm waiting for my biscuits to finish, I've got a half a cup of water here and 2 tablespoons of my gluten-free flour. And a little whisk, and I'm just going to whisk this together. This will help to thicken our stew. I don't want to add it in just yet because I need to pay attention to the oven with my biscuits. But I can get this ready. So my biscuits ended up going about 10 minutes. They sure look good and they smell good. They look like rustic biscuits. This one kind of looks a little bit round, but that's all right. So very carefully remove them to a cooling rack. So they do not look exactly like biscuits. They're a lot flatter than a biscuit, but they still look absolutely delicious. So now for our stew. I'm going to take out my bay leaves. It is still simmering, but it looks like a beef soup right now. We want this to be really thick and delicious, although it is delicious already too. So I'm going to turn the heat up just so I can get it back up to kind of a full boil. Give my water and flour a good stir, and then stir this in. And then we want this to boil and stir for about 1 minute. Once your stew is as thick as you'd like it to be, if you find that it's not as thick as you'd like, just do the same thing, mix a little bit of flour and water, and then add it in, and then boil it. You can do what I'm going to do. I'm going to add in a splash of heavy cream. I'm going to turn the heat off. Stir in the rest of my bacon. I I don't like to simmer my bacon the entire time that my stew is cooking. Then it gets a little soggy. Although it will get soggy after being in the hot stew anyways. But this way it kind of does have a little bit more texture. Get yourself a bowl. And I've got my ladle instead of my slotted spoon. Okay, it sure looks good and hot. And it's not super duper thick. But we've got biscuits that can help soak up the juices. And you'll notice with something like this, it's usually a little bit thicker the next day. And it is super hot. So while it's cooling off, I'm going to try one of my biscuits here. Super flat, but I don't mind. And here we are at the bottom, nice and golden brown. If you have some excess flour, that's why it's a little paler up here, but that's all right. But it is super light. And of course, you can't tell that my Swiss cheese is in there, but we know it's in there. Those are delicious. I'm gonna dip it into my stew here. You don't have to serve biscuits with beef stew. My saltine crackers would go really good with this. Or your favorite cracker. Let's take a bite here. I'm trying to get a little bit of everything. It's kind of hard to tell if I got a parsnip or not. They're the same color as a potato. You get a carrot in there too. That is delicious. You know, my vegetables are just soft, but still have their shape to them. You can look at this and you can tell that they're in here. You can tell what they are. And my beef stew meat is delicious and tender. And if you've never had parsnips or cabbage in a beef stew before, you should try it. I don't know about where you live, but where I live, winter is still here and going strong. So I thought that beef stew and biscuits would be perfect. One last soup or stew for the season. This also freezes really well. So if you make extra, put some in the freezer. And my biscuits are delicious. Of course, they're just regular biscuits that look a lot flatter than a regular biscuit. But that's okay. But thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't already. If you have any questions or comments, let me know, and I'll see you on the next one.